Volume 5 C28. Queen Calcabessare's wail carried beyond her chambers, it carried beyond the hall which led to her chambers, it carried down the stairs and into the throne room where nobles sat or stood according to their station. Worried faces and grim, clenched jaws were everywhere. Eyes darted about with uncertainty, and nobody could or would speak. The wealth and power, the pomp and status of their bright mottled clothing, the bright white of the priests who conveyed the will of the gods, all was silent as the grave. The wails of the mourning queen carried out the window and down to the very streets of Hobons, drawing the eyes of the population with dread to the place where their monarch let her misery ring out. She was not alone at least. Kelet Custodio sat on the royal bed with her, they shared the morning embrace as closely as if they were kin. Kelet's tears were quiet, her sobs choked, her body shook in time with that of her queen as the weight of the death of her sister settled on her shoulders and bent her with their weight. How could this have happened? How? Calcu asked with dismay. My queen, my sister could be restored to life, we just have to wait until. Kelet stopped. They've found enough parts of her to do it, Calca said, but what if they don't? Her eyes fluttered as she tried to blink back tears that blurred Kelet's face. Then we do our best without her. Remember, all we have are the initial reports of what happened. Nobody could have foreseen that a dragon would attack the wall. How could they have? Kelet asked. The whole thing sounds like something out of a drunken bard's feverious dream. Calca nodded. It was an analogy she agreed with. Kelet, however, was not through. But my queen, there's no sense in worrying like this, not until we know more. The South is screaming for aid after the disaster at Wenmark, they're withholding taxes, the Paladin Order's vice commander has to be confirmed to the new role at least temporarily. And the rumors are getting worse. And what makes them worse is that they're true. Skana sat in the office in Hobons sipping the best beer she'd had in her entire life. The doppelgangers in front of her chose to take on the faces of some of her former lovers for today, and that made it weird. Skana winked at the one to come up first. She smiled up at the beautiful face, and called him by the name of the long-dead young man. Sami, did you spread the stories in the salons about what happened in Wenmark? Of course, my love, he said, a lying smile on his face that Skana fluttered to recall when the doppelganger reached out and stroked her cheek. Anything for you. Exactly like that, Skana said with a titter, and a delighted little smile grew much larger. Just keep it up, I've got to admit. I feel kind of bad about using Eliana's stories of the Golden Rune to stir some outrage, kinda feels like I'm using her, and I kinda like her. But, she shrugged, the brutal truth might be for the best. Keep the women pissed off at home. And even if they're elves, some things are more likely to strike home for womankind in a way that makes them see the kingdom less positively. Of course. But after? He asked and arched an eyebrow just like the real Sami used to do. Skana felt a brief well of sadness and put her hand over the one of his which touched her cheek. If I still wondered if he was alive, I would enjoy that very much, but it's just too bitter to think about now. But thank you for letting me see his face again. The doppelganger returned to his faceless state and picked up the address that Skana scrawled out for him. Albedo watched from out of Skana's sight, standing in the doorway at the back. It was remarkable and amusing both at once. The humans seemed to have no real fear of the monsters that could mimic those they loved best in the world. If anything, Skana treated everything as a novelty to be embraced with an almost reckless abandon, to the point where she neglected to ask for any form of payment some days. The lack of bigotry against non-humans was a winning point in Albedo's eyes, and even if the auburn-haired girl was no genius, she showed an aptitude for administration, and surprisingly enough, she was literate. Where did you learn to write? Albedo asked on the evening of the third such day, watching the vicious little Roma mistress scribble down talking points to play up. From what she knew of the peasant population, almost none could even write their own names, so writing these things made her all the more a curiosity. Skana's smile never left her face, despite her cheeks being stuffed with lamb which Eliana prepared. Nor did she hesitate to speak with her mouth full. I looked good stories. Bard came through the village and said he got 'em from books. She swallowed the oversized bite and took a deep drink of a wooden cup full of wine and then said, so on a trip to sell stuff I straddled a merchant and offered him the ride of his life if he'd just teach me how to read and write. Mom didn't think much of that, said it was a waste, but I enjoyed it. I'm pretty good at it too. Skana's face beamed with pride as Eliana took her seat at the table. The elf woman was far more demure than Skarna was comfortable with, though it was difficult to blame her, and the sweet temperament made her very pleasant outside of ribald and vulgar humor of the sort Skarna tended to favor. So, she toned it down a little when the elf joined the pair at last. Anyway, as I was explaining to the doppelgangers earlier, Gustav drunkenly confessed that Remedios made sure that the trial went her way. The crazy bitch on the wall must have rubbed her the wrong way somehow. When it makes its way through the women's groups like the salons and the tea houses, it'll reach the more active women in merchant and adventurer guilds. Get the wives, the whole thing comes crashing down. Kinda like a village that way. Skarna chuckled a bit, and Ileana asked, "How could you possibly know that?" "A city is just a big village, idle people talk, and the men of this country are kind of dense about that. They don't put women in charge of much, so they create a lot of idle women who become backroom power brokers and gossips. It happened all the time in the village, and I learned a lot from the people who would pass through my home. We may not look like much, even us pretty ones. But put us all together, and there's not a lot we don't hear from somewhere, and nobody ever listens to the little three." Skarna raised her fist, and one finger at a time with each of the things which followed: a woman, a peasant, and a whore. "Are they that stupid?" Albedo asked, almost not believing that she could be so lucky as to have such an easy mission. "Yes, Miss Jimenez, they can be," Skarna answered to confirm her dry, scathing criticism. She stabbed her knife into a hunk of meat and began cutting it down to a smaller piece. "Maybe it's not as dumb as openly saying that non-humans are people, at a trial where you're charged with that as a kind of crime. But still." She shoved a hunk of meat in her mouth, and while she chewed she said, "Poethy dumb." Volume 5 C29. "Do you know what the real problem is with magic?" Nia asked of Dark while she walked beside him along the training grounds where the Orcish warriors were forming a shield wall. The shields were fairly crude, but by stroke of luck, the wide-rounded shields they favored would make for an adequate wall if they were formed up properly. A wooden base with a sheet of steel over the front and a grip in the center, it did require a little modification. Nia had a strap added to the far side through which the arm fit, and the hand grip moved to the opposite side, allowing for far more versatility of movement, and the first of her changes were embraced by her new people. "No, what?" Dark asked as she spun and kicked at the shield wall. Her foot connected, and the orc grunted with pain, but he didn't fall. He was held up by a column of orcs behind him, each one bracing the one in front. Their shields held overhead to provide a turtle shell-like protection from missile fire. The arrows clattered and fell, bouncing off of the shields, and Nia landed a punch at another orc who showed his face, shattering his teeth. "Better the shield than you," she snapped, and though he grunted in pain, he wore a now less toothy smile and raised his shield up. Orcs have a high pain tolerance, she acknowledged about her warriors. She then looked up to Dark again and continued to walk the line. "It's easy. It's so easy that everybody wants to use it. They love it so much that when they have it, it's all they use. Do you know why I was so good at hunting orcs, and stone spitters, and snake people, and whatever else slipped into the wilds?" Dark looked down at the white-haired woman. "I'm guessing you'll tell me." Nia chuckled. "Yes, I will. It's because I had no magic to use for that sort of thing. My ability to put mana into my arrows for a deadlier shot is, or maybe was, the only thing I could do. So I had to hide myself in other ways, learn how to use mud, moss, leaves, dye, paint, and the environment. That's the magic of nature. Nobody ever looked for that, they always tried to find signs of magic use. And that is how we'll win the first fight. You know, I could just simply use my breath and claws to give you an easy win." Dark pointed out, and Nia stopped walking. She craned her neck to look up at the dragon and put a hand on his scaled limb. "I know, but I have to establish credibility as a queen. If people think my only strength is you, they will never listen to me. Besides, they need a win to get their confidence back. And if they win using the things I teach them, they'll embrace the new ways with the fervor of a religious convert." Dark gave a low growl of acknowledgement. "You thought this through," he said, and watched a group of orcs trying to push through a shield wall. Nia patted his scales. "We're small, we're weak, we're short-lived compared to dragons, but that means we have to work harder, not that we can't improve. We have to think, use our minds, and plan for anything. Paladins are taught leadership, and encouraged to improve ourselves continuously. This is how we How humans, survived as long as we did. Olisar Dark thought that one through while they finished the inspections. Healers in the aftermath took care of the injured, and Naya went over the training results with the assembled tribal leaders. They sat cross-legged at her feet while she sat on the rounded upper half of Olisar Dark's vicious claws. You are no longer just tribal leaders. She explained patiently, you are my field commanders, one day perhaps even generals, and now that you're aware of the power of unity, I want to make something else clear. The various Orc leaders looked back and forth at each other, their puzzled faces met, each one unaware of what their new queen intended. Would it help if you had a few hundred, or a few thousand long-range warriors to help guard your wings? She asked, and the Orc's recessed eyes became sharper, more beady. Yes, but Orcs, we don't have good bows. Not good arrows. We fight close. Thalrin punched one fist into his palm with an audible smack to emphasize his point. We're going to get that support from somewhere else. Naya answered. The Orcs laughed. Humans will not help Orcs. I mean the stone spitters, Naya said point-blank, and they stopped laughing. They are your enemies, but they are your weakest enemies. They don't fight as well up close as you do. Combined? We will have 2 hands to 1. I intend to attack, Naya said, just like when I was the huntress of the wildlands, I was always on the attack. Defense may win a battle, but it will lose a war, Naya said to them, while they rumbled and grumbled a bit. I don't want to fight them again in 10 years. This is not going to be war as demi-humans have ever known it. Not one of plunder, not one of simply slaughter or a cattle raid. You will learn to fight as humans fought, it's why they have a wall and you don't. Thalrin bowed his head first. Huntress gave me life. Let us feed and flee. Gives us good shield knowing. Shield wall is strong, she is strong. We obey. It was the endorsement Naya needed. Several of the Orcs affectionately caressed the crude but now improved shields that leaned against their bodies. The new grip style proved popular, with the shield bash being the cause of many an injury that kept the healers low on mana that day. Naya stood up, then rest for now, my people, we begin again tomorrow, and select scouts to watch the green fist in the path to the nearest stone spitter village. The meeting broke up after that, and the sun slowly disappeared over the horizon, leaving Naya alone with Olisar Dark. Will you go to a tent or a hut? Naya shook her head. No. I will stay with you. That will be fine. Olisar Dark said and watched the dragonid lie down with her back against his foreleg. I wonder if she will grow wings, or if her skin will continue to harden until it is like scales. Will she grow a tail? Open questions, all of them, and the only answer he could come to was, time will tell. Her strength was already far in excess of what it was before, which from what he gathered of the demi-humans thus far, was vital to her future. And strangely enough, he felt somehow it was vital to his own. Volume 5 C30. Kalka paled when Kellet said that. What do you mean? It's true? Kellet sighed and took her queen's hands. My precious queen, my wonderful lady. She came as close as she dared, so close that she could feel the breath of life coming past the lips of the radiant and beautiful blonde royal. My sister and I have always been devoted to your ideals. Please believe me, but ideals are not a system of government, and there have been times when it appeared someone would escape justice. Someone who might be a threat to your rule, who might make your people cry. When that happened, I knew that my sister, always for the greater good, would take action. Action? Like bribing a jury? Blackmail a jury? Murder? Kalka's eyes hardened. Even I can't say for sure. My sister was very tight-lipped even to me, but her belief in the absolute justice of your rule was such that she would do anything to ensure it was successful. I know how she is, a scout who let demi-humans live, who openly called them people, is a dangerous and disruptive element no matter what her reputation. Kellet bit her lower lip while she felt the bright eyes of her queen searching her face. Kalka's hands were shaking in the touch of Kellet. How many times? The queen finally asked. Kellet's jaw tensed. My queen, how many times were the guilty looking like they might escape justice? Yes, it was wrong. But it was for the greater good of all humanity, please understand that. And why wasn't I informed? Kalka demanded, her voice becoming more regal. The shaking fingers stopped, her eyes hardened. She was not the beautiful idealist in that moment, but the hardened queen who so excelled, that her own brother, who could have had the throne, deferred to her. Because it would wound you. Kellett rushed the words out. She tightened her hold on the warm hands of her queen. As long as you were uninjured, you would continue to work without stopping, always making us better. Always making us stronger. You intended well, but I have no doubt that this is the root cause of the corruption that has begun to rot us from within. Kalka shook her head with an almost violent energy. No more of that. When Remedios is resurrected, I will speak with her alone. My queen. Kellett tried to speak, but the queen's sudden glare shut her down. Go, have the resources gathered that we need to help the south, but make sure you collect whatever taxes you need to. Gustav will join you with reinforcements to ensure that taxes are collected without incident. The queen gave the order, and for a moment Kellett was still. Go. Now. The queen's voice hardened like her eyes, and the Kellett stepped backward with a deep bow. At once, my queen, she said, and withdrew from the royal presence with a heavy, aching heart. Gustav rode along at the head of the column. For this they chose the more circuitous route. It carried them through the wildlands and the peripheral villages that eked out a living on tiny farms, harvesting wood, herbs, and other things from the forest. Such small places should have been easy prey for demi-human raiders. But one thing was common, they almost all had low walls, nothing dramatic, but spike-tipped logs that surrounded the few dwellings in the area. When Gustav asked, the answer was the same: the hunters had some captive demi-humans help us, and let them go in exchange. Learning that the hunters had been sentenced to die on the wall and been eaten by a dragon, left the occupants of those little villages to turn their backs or outright boo the paladins until they rode on. What have I done? He asked himself. In 20 years' service, the new commander could not recall ever having been booed or had a peasant show their back to him. But the more he gathered stories about what went on in the wildlands south of the wall, the more he felt he made the single largest mistake of his life. He tightened his hold on the reins of his horse and kept his eyes facing front. You were just following orders. Just doing what you were told. The squire was found guilty. You were just doing your job. That's all. There's nothing to feel guilty about. Gustav raged at himself and his conscience, but the agonized screams of the woman on the wall haunted him night after night. The wails of her parents as they tried desperately to get to her. And knowing beyond question that the trial had been a sham. It made every denial in his heart burn as if he were the one pierced by the swords on the wall. In his heart he accused himself. In his heart, Gustav pronounced himself guilty. In his heart, he sentenced himself to life. Never again. I will never do that again. Damn the orders. I have to live by following them, and I don't know how to live with this. He argued with himself as he recalled the peasant girl's quiet nighttime admonition, her indifference, her scolding, her outright mockery of everything he believed and held to be true, and she could have been said to epitomize it all in that she simply wouldn't stand close enough for him to reach her. Once he understood that, a lot of things fell into place that he never considered. Now that he was aware, he noticed that almost none of the younger peasant women that had to live in those villages would emerge from their homes while he or his soldiers were present. Old women, men, and young children were all they ever saw. The only exceptions were when a young woman expressly sought a lover or two. So this is how we're really seen. Cheers when we're defending them, but suspicion behind every set of eyes, and, worse, justified. The recognition of the reality he was long oblivious to set him on edge, making him hypersensitive. My lord, why are we taking the long road back to Hobens? One of his subordinates asked. Because I said so, Gustav snapped, and the young soldier fell silent at his side. He could feel the young man's flinch and hear it in the way the shining burnished armor clinked as he stiffened his back. Gustav relaxed and sighed, because I wanted to see something of the work of the one we ordered killed. That's why. And because I had a lot of thinking to do. Remedios' remains won't rot in a preserving cloth, and I needed to know what I'd really done back there. I see. The soldier said half-heartedly. But Gustav could tell from the young man's voice that he clearly did not see, and the provisional commander of the Paladin Order was fine with that. I hope he never does. The commander thought at once, and relaxed into the rocking motion of his steadily walking horse, and tried not to think of anything else for just a little while. Volume 5 C31. Sweat on the training field saves blood on the battlefield, Naya said as she watched her orcs take up their positions. A few days was all they had, and it wasn't much, but she noticed something important about tribal warriors as they crawled on their bellies on top of two hills while a third group made camp openly on another. Fires lit up the night on that one. Their presence was obvious, just as it should be. Tribal warriors grew up training, but it was a matter of routine over discipline, and individual excellence was carried forward to an absurd degree. Exposed to unit discipline for the first time, they only ever responded in two ways. With an almost religious conversion-like fervor that had them begging for more time in the line. Or they rejected it completely, preferring to stand only for themselves and their own strength. She lay on her belly atop the quiet hill and watched while the unit disobeyed orders and lit up fires for cooking. Thalron crawled over to her, and watched the little group do as they always did. "You knew?" he half accused. "Do you think I can make the whole world dance to my tune at will?" Nia asked and hummed a few bars to emphasize her sarcasm. "No, I just gave them an order and let them make their own decisions. They dismissed my worries and warnings, and that is on them. At least there aren't many, and this will be a good object lesson for the survivors." Thalron waited, the rest of the more compliant tribal members waited, and true to form it did not take long for a group of stone spitters to find the outlying orc position. The air was warm over Nia's skin. Privately she wondered, is this because of my body's change, or was it always like this? The tribe of stone spitters surrounded the hill, unaware of the orcs who lay on their bellies on the more distant position. The orcs on top of the surrounded hill reacted with the undiscipline which Nia knew typified tribal thinking. A chance for personal glory, status, and the proof of one's strength trumped any amount of reason. They began to taunt the stone spitters to come up, and the stone spitters, with their big, broad bodies, dared the orcs to come down. It was almost like a mockery of real battle, taunts and bravado, everyone working themselves up and denying their private fears. Nia looked over to Thalron. "Carry word to the rear, remember, I want as many stone spitters captured alive as possible, so do not engage there. What passes for an army? Ride to their settlement, capture it while they're here. I will see you after." The orc chief grunted and crawled away, not daring to stand up until he was descending the far side of the hill, and leaving his queen to her plan. Stone spitters continued to trickle in over the course of the evening, and all she did was wait. Thalron's host of orcs rode like mad over the hilly landscape. Their small cavalry force was augmented by orcs who specialized in martial arts that enhanced strength and stamina, allowing them, for a time at least, to keep pace with horses, and in this much at least, it was possible to get to their destination. The stone spitter settlement they targeted was the most important in the area, having the oldest legacy, the strongest warriors, and the prickliest of reputations. They negotiated and fought viciously, and were the greatest of the relatively weak stone spitter numbers. They were also completely unprepared for the attack of Thalron or his orc forces arriving with the coming of the sun. The tribe was not even properly awakened when their watch caught sight of the coming attack, and by the time he did, orc blow, lesser strength. The martial art enhanced his range and power, so when Thalron threw the little club, it split the skull of the watch before he could raise the alarm. The wall of the settlement was low, and the cavalry force put their horses up to it, then simply jumped up to the lightly guarded position, breaking in with battle cries that brought the whole settlement into chaos. The fight was as short as it was brutal. The ranged stone spitters were scattered among their little earthen huts, and with no rocks ready, they were quick to surrender, with the bulk of them herded into the center. In total there were, to his surprise, over 4,000 families. The chief of the stone spitters was dragged before Thalron. He shuffled along, his great bulky wide body and thick muscles a testament to his experience, and that it took 3 orcs to handle him and draw him close proved his strength. Still, he was cast down to his knees. Stone spitters had unusual faces, 2 eyes, but no real nose, just a small dot-like hole with a flap over it that opened and closed. Their mouths were round and funnel-like, with lips largely absent, in his view. They were hideous, their bodies ran the gamut from grey to brown stone colors, and they had thick, long fingers well suited for collecting stones and breaking them down into ammunition for later use. "You are chief here?" Thalron asked. The stone spitter grunted, "No. I am chief's son. My father is chief, he is away dealing with your people who come to our land. When he returns, you will die." "Not the chief." "No, that makes sense. He would go with his warriors. Still, impressive figure, he probably would be a good chief one day." Thalron thought and nodded, then crossed his arms in front of his chest. "My queen is dealing with your father. If you are lucky, he will impress her. Thalron retorted, and the eyes of the stone spitter widened as a human's might have. Your queen? He asked. Huntress of the Wildlands is now queen of orcs. Her people cast her out, no longer wanted her. She is ours now, he said with pride. Father was nearly killed by the huntress. We lost 20 spitters to her. Not many kill spitters from afar. Are they mad? He asked, aghast at the idea of dispensing with an effective warrior. Or are you lying? His eyes narrowed in suspicion. She was sentenced to die for her mercy. She is here now, bearing dragon's blood in her veins. You will see, as will your father. She will be here soon. Then when he surrenders, she will be queen of stone spitters. Thalron replied with gusto, and the various orcs cheered while the stone spitters could only sit, confused, concerned, and full of doubt. When the sun was nearly up, Nia rose and went to give orders to the rest of the orc tribes. A core of them held the hill as rallying points in the event of a problem. The rest, however, made the long circuitous route to positions just barely out of stone spitter range. The stone spitters were still caught up in the drama with their captive orcs atop the hill. Twice each side had tried to take the other, and twice both sides had retreated. It's no wonder humanity survived. Too many of our enemies keep brains in their biceps. She rolled her eyes and waited for the light to come up. If Thalron did his part, this will go smoothly. The rising sun brought horror to the stone spitters' camp, which suddenly found that there were thousands of orcs on either side of the hill, and orc banners raised on the hills beyond. The orc drums began to sound, and Nia mounted up a horse to ride over the open ground toward the stone spitters' camp. Her orcs at her back were watching her with worried faces, her hands held high overhead. She bellowed out. Queen of Frost, Nia Baraha, comes to treat with the stone spitter chief. If he does not come out, then I will come to him in my manis. The stone spitter dismay was evident. A non-orc was unexpected, the titles even less so, and it was not long before the call was answered with the arrival of a stone spitter of considerable enough size that he was eye-level with her even while on horseback. He had a long, heavy gait that threatened the earth beneath his feet and carried him quickly to her place between the two forces. I know you, he said when he came close. You look not the same, but I know you, he said with surprise. His step became careful, or perhaps simply polite without the swaggering bluster of a tribal chief. I'd have a hard time forgetting someone your size, Nia said with a cocky little smile on her face. Things have changed, and I'll spare you the details. Those are my orcs up there, and I'm not going to let you kill them. Orcs and stone spitters fight, it is how we always were. They are here, you are here. The chief clapped his meaty hands together. We fight. If you believed that, you wouldn't have come out to talk, Nia said and pointed toward his home. Go home, and I will not attack. Fighting here, far from where your women and children can see you, this is not a glorious end. Go back to your village. If you can fend us off from your walls, your women will be proud, your children will admire you, and you will gain great fame. She appealed to his vanity at every turn, and she could see him getting puffed up as he imagined the victory celebration. But he was not a complete fool. You will strike our backs before then, he said. I give you my word that no member of Rockfist will be harmed while leaving this hill. We will follow you to your home, but until you face my army, we will not hurt you. Is the word of the huntress not good? Nia asked and opened her arms at her sides. He groused a little, but gave a small nod. Yes. Huntress spared my son. I must trust the word of the life-giver. Then go. Take your people home. We will fight, if you wish, when you face my army at home, Nia said, and they parted ways. The passage of time was tense and lengthy as the orcs formed up in a long, broad line to give the impression of greater numbers than they had. The stone spitters continued their withdrawal from the hilltop, grateful at least not to be surrounded or ambushed, and she could feel them relax with confidence as they drew closer to home. But Nia's smile lit up like the sun in the sky when their shouts of consternation went up, once they saw the orc banners raised over the walls of their home. Nia rode forward again. The orc drums began to resound. Chief of Rockfist, your home fell in the night to Thalron. Inside, your families, your children, your future lies bound beneath my warriors' weapons. True to my word, there would be no battle until you faced my army. You are facing them now. The orcs who occupied the village stood up along the low walls, leaving the stone spitter forces trapped between their own walls, and a much larger army of orcs, most of whom were fresh and ready to fight. The stone spitters formed themselves up into a circle. Warriors darted their eyes left and right, unsure of what to do, where to go. Their courage hanging by a thread. "What are your terms?" the stone spitter chief shouted back. "Call me your queen, and your families live. You live, give me your loyalty, lives, armies, and become one. Bury your enmity, and help me seize all of the Abelian hills. Kneel, give me your oath, and I give you back everything I now have taken, or have the power to take. Rule on, but in my name," she yelled back over the distance. The moment hung, tense, uncertain. One stray rock, and a massacre would begin. "Don't be a fool," she prayed to the gods she no longer loved. And then he emerged from among their numbers, jostling his way through. The chief crossed the divide and went down on one knee. Nia rode over to him, remaining on her horse. She held out the back of her hand. "Chief of Stonefist is yours, Stonefist is yours. Queen of Orcs is Queen of Stone Spitters. But, do you truly want it all?" The sheer scale of her ambition was not lost on him, or any of those who heard her speak openly of it. The breadth of it all brought home the infinite possibilities. But there was also the immediate concern of not being wiped out. "Yes," Nia said, "things are changing in this world. My former home, it isn't home anymore. If I have a new people, I want the best for them, and for that I have to stop the things that hurt them. I spared your lives in the past, so you may trust me now. I will never betray those who have not betrayed me. Come, let us go into your village, feast your lives, let me toast your courage and honor, and lay out the future I have in mind." He kissed the back of her hand, then when she clasped his and hauled him to his feet, she gestured toward his village. "Stonefist word is good," she shouted, "open the gate." Prickled by the praise, and relieved to be alive, they headed toward the village where Nia planned next on how to more fully win their hearts before changing their world again, and behind all that, she planned her next campaign.